Now we'll take a tour of the Tools section of the Fenestrae Server Administrator, beginning with the Faxination Address Manager. The Address Manager is used to manage both Faxination users in Active Directory and Faxination users and entities that are stored in the Fen Messaging SQL database. Here we see the users in the Atlanta OU of the Contoso Active Directory environment. On the User Properties General tab, first we have the name of this user as defined in Active Directory, the primary address of this user, the primary host connector responsible for this user, along with the address type, the system address for this user when required, the charge code of this user when required, the inbound mail template for this user, and permissions for this user to override their default charge code when that feature is supported by their messaging client. On the Routing tab, you can configure a list of inbound routing codes for this user. DIR stands for Direct Inbound Routing, and this user will receive faxes when the routing code passed from the telephony system is 4567. This is typically the last 4 digits of a fax number dedicated to this user. The Proxy Addresses tab defines alternative ways to identify this user, with the primary highlighted in bold. This helps to avoid confusion when a user exists in both Active Directory and the Faxination user database. In this example, Jamie can send outbound messages through Microsoft Exchange via the SMTP stack from an MFP using her domain credentials or from an MFP using PIN code authentication. Inbound messages to Jamie will go to the primary address. The Extended Data tab is used to manage additional data about this user that is stored as part of their Exchange mailbox. This is not used in most cases. On the Fax tab, first we set the default cover sheet for this user, the type of file they wish to receive for inbound faxes, their CSID. Recall that the CSID is the small text that you see at the top of each page of a transmitted fax. When this field is populated, this user's CSID will override the CSID configured on the sending fax device. Fax-related permissions, including overrides for the cover sheet and CSID when supported by the messaging client. And the messaging limits to apply to this user when the Fenestrae Limits feature is enabled globally. On the SMS tab, the template can be thought of as a cover sheet for mobile messages. Mobile templates can be used to add information to an outgoing SMS message, such as the subject field. The mobile templates are stored in the kernel CS folder along with the fax cover sheets. NoCover.tpl indicates that no mobile template should be applied to SMS messages from this user. SMS-related permissions, SMS messaging limits, and SMS messaging options that are specific to this user. On the MMS tab, MMS templates are similar to SMS templates, with the extension MMS. MMS-related permissions, and MMS messaging limits. Back in the main Address Manager window, next we're going to look under Options and Data Source Configuration. This is our Active Directory data source, and we're going to click Edit to see how it's configured. First is the name of this Active Directory resource. It defaults to the name of the first domain controller. The type of syntax to use with LDAP queries to this Active Directory resource. This can be standard LDAP when the network topology is simple, or global catalog when the network is more complicated and the domain controllers have the global catalog role. A list of the domain controllers to use for queries. Queries to these servers will be attempted from top to bottom. The first response received will be used. Set the primary address mail system for the users within this data source and the address type. On the Users tab, you can set the relative importance of this data source. This is used in combination with the kernel's inbound routing option to filter duplicate users. When two users are found with the same address, the user in the data source with the highest importance is selected. Under Enumeration, you can select the root folder of Active Directory where Faxination will begin looking for users, either to match them to an inbound routing code or to determine their outbound messaging options and permissions. The root folder specified here must contain all of your Active Directory Faxination users. Otherwise, the forest root should be used. LDAP queries can be further refined using the Folder Filtering tab. Individual folders or organizational units can be enabled and disabled beginning with the root folder defined on the Enumeration tab. In this example, Contoso is our root folder, and we have only enabled the Users folder and the Atlanta folder. Disabling folders can help make the LDAP queries more efficient by eliminating folders where you know Faxination users don't exist. This feature can also be used to restrict Faxination services. When a user exists in a folder that is hidden from Faxination, that user can neither send nor receive Faxination messages. Next comes the cover sheet editor. There's not much to say about it. It's very well written and intuitive. However, you do need to understand DDA fields and how you can use them to populate your cover sheets. You can see here that we have a field name called extent_1 with a prefix of custom attribute _1. Let's look at where that comes from. Back in the Tools section under DDA Fields, we have the ability to map Active Directory data so that it can be used to populate cover sheets. DDA stands for Domain Defined Attributes and is exclusive to Faxination. This feature is rarely used. There are nearly 50 predefined fields already available in the cover sheet editor, but it's there if you can find a use for it. Next in the Tools section is the Document Conversion configuration. Essentially, this tool is used to download the current document conversion registry, save a backup of it, make changes to it, and upload those changes back to the registry. First is a list of conversions that are possible from one file type to another, and the converter required. Some document types may require multiple conversion steps to create a faxable TIFF document. Next are the types of documents that are supported by Faxination. And finally, the recognition conditions, the way that the file attachments are identified by their binary signature and other criteria. You won't need to modify the document conversion registry in most cases, and if there is a need, you will typically be working with Fenestrae support to resolve the issue. Note that making a backup of the Faxination document conversion registry is critical before making any changes here, and can save you the pain of a reinstall if something goes wrong. Next is the License Manager, which we've already explored during our installation videos. The Activation Keys tab displays your current activation keys, the contract number, and the current system key. And the Faxination tab displays a list of installed Faxination components and their license status. In this example, we're running Faxination Server in evaluation mode, and this is day 5 of a 30-day evaluation. The Faxination Management Portal is a web-based administration tool that replicates many of the features of the Fenestrae Server Administrator. In Faxination 2016, several features such as number substitution and outbound service routing have been removed from the Fenestrae Server Administrator and incorporated into the Management Portal instead. Fenestrae Development's goal is to eventually have the Management Portal as the primary interface for Faxination. We're slowly moving in that direction with each new release. We're going to explore the portal in a future video. This entry in the Tools section of the Fenestrae Server Administrator is really just a URL link that launches the default browser, but it's a convenient way to access some of the features that don't exist in both management tools. Next, we come to the Fenestrae Queue Manager. The Queue Manager allows you to view the status of all jobs currently in process by Faxination, and pause, edit, or delete those jobs depending on their status. The default refresh time for the queue display is 5 seconds. You can force an immediate refresh by using the F5 key on your keyboard. If the queue display is blank or unresponsive and the title of the window displays disconnected, it typically means that the Faxination queue service was stopped and restarted while the queue manager was running. You can re-establish the connection through the File menu option, but the easiest solution is to simply close the queue manager and reopen it. You can make changes to jobs in the queue by right-clicking on them. Under Priority, you can set the message to High, Normal, or Low Priority. You can also reschedule the date and time of a job, change the destination address, which is the fax or mobile number, change the service route for a job. You must ensure that the new service route is valid, or else the job will remain in the queue indefinitely. And change the system address of a job, which is used with Faxination web services and other host connectors. The Trace tool is used to view the operations of all Faxination components independently in real time. The individual traces are either disabled, enabled but not running, or running. When Faxination is first installed, all of the traces are disabled. There is a small performance penalty when traces are enabled, so it's recommended to only enable the traces that you need to view for troubleshooting purposes. On the Destination tab, the typical configuration is to stream the trace information to a mail slot, which is then displayed in the Trace Tool window for that component. Mail slots are an old Microsoft Windows NT technology, but they still exist in the latest Windows Server operating systems. New for Faxination 2016, you may direct the trace information to a syslog daemon, which is a server dedicated to managing traces that typically runs on the Unix or Linux platform. When a trace is directed to syslog, the data can no longer be viewed from the Trace tool. It is expected that the syslog daemon itself will be used to view and manage the traces. On the Logging tab, you can choose to write the streaming log information to a file. The Extended Logging option saves the trace in XML format. This preserves the colors in the trace: blue for configuration information, black for normal operations, amber for warnings, and red for errors. Once saved, the XML file can be loaded back into the Trace tool for viewing at a later time. Extended logging does not record any additional technical information over standard text logging. If you're collecting traces to submit to Fenestrae support, plain text with extended logging disabled is preferred. Set the path and file name of the log file. Set the maximum size of the log file. And set the behavior to use when the maximum size of the log file is reached. New for Faxination 2016, you can now highlight and copy information from a paused trace window, colorize specific processing threads to make them easier to follow, and hide non-highlighted threads. And finally, the UMR Manager. UMR stands for Universal Message Routing. Its origins go back to the Exchange 5.5 days, before Fenestrae developed HTTP connectivity to remote hosts and devices. Its main purpose was to allow multiple Faxination servers to pass messages between them when one server was better suited to deliver a message. Think of it as an overly complex version of least-cost routing. UMR is mostly obsolete, but we've kept it in the product because one of its features is that it can delay faxes for transmission when the telco costs are lower. I can only think of a few customers that are actually using UMR, but it's fully documented in the Faxination 2016 Administrator's Guide.